I knew something was wrong the moment I saw Margaret Pemberton standing at my front door with that clipboard pressed against her chest like it was a sacred document, her perfectly manicured nails tapping against the plastic surface with the rhythm of impending doom. "Zachary Eastwood, we need to discuss your cooperation with the community," she announced before I could even say hello, her voice carrying that particular pitch that every homeowner in Willow Creek Estates had learned to dread. I leaned against the doorframe of my house in Phoenix, Arizona, letting the morning sun warm my back while I studied the president of our homeowner association. Margaret was in her early 50s, with blonde highlights that looked like they cost more than my monthly water bill, wearing a white pantsuit that probably cost more than my car payment. Everything about her screamed middle management who had finally found a kingdom to rule. "Good morning to you too, Margaret. What can I do for you?" I kept my tone neutral, knowing from 3 years of living in this neighborhood that any hint of sarcasm would be noted in whatever file she kept on all of us. "The annual Willow Creek Fun Run is scheduled for next Saturday, and according to the route planned by the events committee, the runners will need access through your property." She flipped through papers on her clipboard, not looking at me. I straightened up immediately. "I'm sorry. What? Through my property? Your property backs up to the community trail system, but there's a more scenic route that cuts through the corner of your lot, past that charming gate you installed last year." She said charming like it was a curse word. "We'll need you to unlock it from 6 in the morning until approximately 10. My house sat on a larger lot at the edge of the development, one of the reasons I'd paid a premium for it. The previous owner had installed a decorative iron gate that connected to the community walking trails, but when I'd moved in, I'd discovered that people treated my backyard like a public thoroughfare. Dog walkers, joggers, teenagers cutting through at all hours. So I'd installed a lock, posted private property signs, and thought that was the end of it. "Margaret, that's my private property. The gate stays locked." Her smile never wavered, but her eyes went cold. "The HOA bylaws state that homeowners must support community events. This is a charitable fundraiser for the local elementary school. Surely you're not against helping children." "I'm against strangers running through my yard, but nice try with the guilt trip." I crossed my arms. "My property line is clearly marked. The community trails are public. My yard is not." She made a note on her clipboard with aggressive little movements. "The events committee has already printed the maps and registered over 200 runners. We can't change the route now." "That sounds like poor planning on your part." Margaret's perfectly applied makeup couldn't hide the red flush creeping up her neck. "Mr. Eastwood, I'm asking you nicely to be a team player. Everyone else in the neighborhood has agreed to cooperate. Everyone else doesn't have a gate on the trail route." I kept my voice level, but I could feel my own frustration building. "Look, I'm not trying to be difficult, but you can't just decide to use my property without asking me first. I'm asking now. After you've already planned everything and printed maps, that's not asking, Margaret. That's telling me what you've decided and expecting me to comply." She drew herself up to her full height, which was about 5'4" in heels. "The HOA board will be voting on this matter at tomorrow night's emergency meeting. I expect to see you there." It wasn't an invitation. After she left, I stood in my doorway for a long moment, looking at the gate in question. It was about 50 yards from my back patio, a beautiful wrought iron piece that the previous owner had commissioned. Beyond it, the community trail wound through preserved desert landscape, saguaro cacti standing like sentinels in the morning light. I'd loved that gate when I'd bought the house, right up until I'd realized it made my property a shortcut. My phone rang. It was Derek Hammond, my neighbor 2 houses down and one of the few people in Willow Creek Estates who hadn't drunk the HOA Kool-Aid. "Dude, I just saw Margaret leaving your place looking like she wanted to commit murder. What did you do?" "Refused to unlock my gate for the fun run," Derek laughed. "Oh man, you're going to be on her list now. She's been planning this thing for months. It's all she talks about at the board meetings." "You actually go to those?" I walked back into my house, heading for the coffee maker. "Someone has to keep an eye on them. Last month they voted to fine the Hendersons $300 because their desert willow was dropping too many seed pods on the sidewalk. A native plant, Zach. They got fined for a native plant doing what native plants do." I poured myself a cup of coffee, black and strong. "She said there's an emergency meeting tomorrow night." "Yeah, I got the email about 20 minutes ago. Emergency session to discuss property access and community cooperation. She's going to try to make an example out of you. That evening, I did what I should have done when I first bought the house. I pulled out all my closing documents and read through every single page of the HOA bylaws and covenants. It took me 4 hours and 2 more pots of coffee, but I found what I was looking for. Or rather, I found what wasn't there. Nowhere in the 73 pages of rules, regulations, and restrictions was there any clause that gave the HOA the right to access private property for events. There were provisions about maintaining common areas, architectural guidelines, noise restrictions, and approximately 47 different ways they could fine you for having the wrong shade of beige on your house trim. But nothing about mandatory property access. I also found something interesting in the section about community events. Any activity that took place on HOA property required proof of liability insurance and signed waivers from all participants. The fun run would be starting and ending in the community park, which was definitely HOA property. I spent the next morning making calls, first to my real estate attorney, who confirmed that the HOA couldn't force me to grant access to my private property. Then to my insurance agent, who explained in uncomfortable detail exactly what could happen to my homeowner's insurance rates if someone got injured on my property during an event I didn't authorize. If someone trips and breaks their ankle on your property and you gave permission for them to be there, your insurance would cover it, she explained, but your rates would go up, and depending on the severity, you could be looking at a significant increase. If multiple people got injured, even worse. What if I specifically told them they couldn't use my property? Then they'd be trespassing and their own insurance or the event organizer's insurance would be responsible. But Zach, you'd still probably end up dealing with lawsuits and legal headaches. The best defense is not to let people on your property in the first place. Armed with information and a growing sense that this was going to get worse before it got better, I showed up at the emergency HOA meeting Tuesday night. The community center meeting room was packed. Margaret sat at the front table with 4 other board members, all of them looking grave and important. I recognized most of the faces in the audience, neighbors I'd waved to at the mailbox or chatted with at the community pool. Now, they were all looking at me like I'd personally canceled Christmas. "Let's call this meeting to order," Margaret announced, banging a gavel that seemed excessive for a homeowner association meeting. "We're here to discuss the refusal of Zachary Eastwood to cooperate with the annual Willow Creek Fun Run." I raised my hand. "Point of order. I didn't refuse to cooperate. I refused to allow trespassing on my private property." A woman I didn't recognize in the front row gasped like I'd said something obscene. Margaret's smile was tight. "Mr. Eastwood, this is a community event that benefits local children. We're asking for 4 hours of access through a corner of your property that you don't even use." "How do you know what parts of my property I use?" She blinked. "I'm sorry?" "You just said I don't use that corner of my property. How would you know that? Have you been surveilling my yard?" Derek coughed to cover a laugh from somewhere behind me. Margaret's face flushed. "That's not the point. The point is that you're being unreasonably difficult about something that would take minimal effort on your part." "Opening my gate isn't the issue," I said, standing up so everyone could hear me clearly. "The issue is liability. If 200 people are going to run through my property, and one of them trips on a rock or gets stung by a bee or has a heart attack on my lawn, who's responsible?" The room went quiet. "The event has insurance," Margaret said, but she sounded less certain now. "Great. I'd love to see the policy. I'd also like to see the liability waivers that all the participants will be signing, and I'd like to be named as an additionally insured party on the event policy." One of the other board members, a man named Stuart Chen, leaned forward. "That seems excessive." "Does it?" I pulled out the printouts I'd made from my insurance company's website. According to premises liability law in Arizona, property owners can be held responsible for injuries that occur on their property, even during events they didn't organize, if they gave permission for people to be there. My insurance agent told me that a single serious injury claim could increase my premiums by 30 to 40%. Multiple claims could make me uninsurable. Margaret waved her hand dismissively. "No one's going to get hurt. It's just a fun run." "Then you won't mind providing the insurance documentation and adding me as an additionally insured party?" We've already spent the budget on permits, T-shirts, and promotional materials. We don't have funding for additional insurance riders. I sat back down. Then I guess the route will need to avoid my property. The meeting devolved into chaos. Multiple people stood up to call me selfish, unreasonable, anti-community. One woman actually used the phrase, "think of the children," without a trace of irony. Margaret tried to restore order with her gavel, but she looked pleased with the mob mentality taking over. Finally, Stuart Chen spoke up. What if we had everyone sign a waiver that specifically releases you from liability? I'd been expecting this. A waiver isn't worth the paper it's printed on if it's not properly written and executed. You'd need every single participant to sign a specific waiver acknowledging that they're entering my private property at their own risk, that they've been informed of potential hazards, and that they release me from any and all liability for injuries, including those caused by the property condition, other participants, or their own actions. The waiver would need to be reviewed by an attorney to make sure it's enforceable under Arizona law. And even then, if a minor gets injured, their parents could still sue on their behalf because minors can't sign away their legal rights. The room had gone quiet again. Margaret's voice was icy. You seem to have thought about this quite a bit. I spent yesterday doing research after you showed up at my door with demands instead of requests. The board will take this under advisement, she said stiffly. This meeting is adjourned. As people filed out, several of them made sure to bump into me or shoot me dirty looks. Derek appeared at my elbow. Well, you've officially become the neighborhood villain. How does it feel? About like I expected. I watched Margaret gathering her papers with sharp, angry movements. This isn't over. Not even close, Derek agreed. I was right. Over the next 3 days, I received 14 emails from Margaret, 6 phone calls, and 1 certified letter, all demanding that I reconsider my position. The homeowners' social media group, which I'd muted months ago, apparently exploded with posts about my selfishness. Someone left a note on my car that said, "Community Traitor" in red marker. Thursday afternoon, Margaret showed up at my door again, this time with Stuart Chen and a woman I recognized as Linda Whitmore, the HOA treasurer. We've prepared a liability waiver, Margaret announced, thrusting a document at me. Every participant will sign this before the race. It specifically releases you from any and all liability. I took the paper and scanned it. It was a mess of legal-sounding language that had clearly been cobbled together from internet templates. Did you have an attorney review this? We used a very reliable online legal service, Linda said defensively. This wouldn't hold up in court. I pointed to several sections. The language is too vague here. This section contradicts itself, and this part isn't even relevant to Arizona law. It references statutes from California. Stuart frowned. How do you know that? Because I had my attorney look at a properly drafted waiver yesterday. I pulled out the document my lawyer had prepared, just to show me what a real liability waiver looked like. This is what you'd need. Every participant over 18 would need to sign it, and participants under 18 would need a parent or legal guardian signature. You'd also need to provide documentation of event insurance that names me as an additionally insured party, with coverage of at least $2 million for bodily injury and property damage. Margaret snatched the document from my hand and read through it, her face getting redder with each paragraph. This is ridiculous. We're not doing all this for a charity fun run. Then the route needs to go around my property. I kept my voice level. Look, I'm not trying to ruin your event. I'm protecting myself from legal and financial liability. If you want to use my property, these are the reasonable requirements. The route is already set, Linda said. We've got sponsors who paid for their logos to be on the maps. We've got 243 registered runners. We've got vendors setting up in the park. We can't change everything now. You should have consulted with me before you planned a route through my private property. The gate was open when we scouted the route last year, Margaret said triumphantly. We assumed you'd be cooperative. You assumed wrong, and the gate was open because I hadn't moved in yet. Stuart held up his hands. Let's all calm down. Zach, what if we reduced the field? Say, 50 runners instead of 200? Would that change your position? It would reduce the statistical likelihood of someone getting injured, but it wouldn't eliminate my liability if someone did get hurt. I shook my head. I'm sorry, but unless you can meet the insurance and waiver requirements, the answer is no. Margaret's voice dropped to a dangerous whisper. You're going to regret this. Is that a threat? It's a promise. The HOA has ways of dealing with uncooperative homeowners. After they left, I called my attorney and told him what Margaret had said. Document everything, he advised. Save all emails, letters, and messages. If they start harassing you or retaliating, we'll have grounds for a lawsuit. Friday morning, I received a notice of violation from the HOA. Apparently, my house number plaque was the wrong shade of bronze. My front yard gravel was a 1/4 inch larger than regulation size, and my garage door had a small dent that violated the community aesthetic standards. Total fines, $900. I took photographs of my neighbors' houses. 3 had house numbers in the exact same shade as mine. 6 had gravel that was identical to my rocks. And the Hendersons 2 streets over had a garage door with a dent twice the size of mine. Friday evening, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. Mr. Eastwood, this is Jennifer Torres from the Arizona Republic. I understand there's a dispute between you and your homeowner association about a charity fun run. How did you get my number? Someone from the HOA contacted us. They said you were blocking a children's charity event. I was hoping to get your side of the story. I considered hanging up, but then I realized this might actually work in my favor. I explained the situation, the liability issues, the lack of proper insurance and waivers, and the retaliatory fines I'd received. So you're not opposed to the event itself, just to the liability risk of having hundreds of people on your private property? Exactly. I offered reasonable solutions, including proper insurance and liability waivers, but the HOA refused. And they sent you violation notices after you declined to open your property? The day after I refused for the final time, yes, for violations that other homeowners also have but aren't being fined for. Jennifer was quiet for a moment. Would you be willing to go on record with this? I think there's a larger story here about HOA overreach. Saturday morning, I woke up to 17 missed calls and 43 text messages. The Arizona Republic had published Jennifer's article. Phoenix HOA attempts to force homeowner to grant property access for event, retaliates with questionable fines. It had gone viral. By noon, I'd been contacted by 3 local news stations, 2 more newspapers, and someone from a national consumer advocacy show. The HOA social media group had imploded into warfare between people who thought I was right and people who thought I was Satan incarnate. Margaret called at 2 in the afternoon. You had no right to go to the press. I have every right. Freedom of speech is still a thing, Margaret. You're making the HOA look bad. The HOA is making the HOA look bad. You tried to force me to give up my property rights, and when I refused, you retaliated with bogus fines. That's not my fault. Those fines are legitimate. Then why aren't you fining the 8 other homeowners with identical violations? I've got photographs. I'm sure the news would love to see them. She hung up on me. Sunday, the HOA's attorney sent me a letter. It was full of legal threats and demands, but the core message was clear. Open your gate or face escalating fines and potential legal action. I forwarded it to my attorney, who laughed so hard I could hear him through the phone. This is the worst legal intimidation letter I've ever seen. They're threatening to sue you for not letting them use your property. They'd be laughed out of court. In fact, I think we should sue them for harassment in violation of your property rights. Let's hold off on that, I said. I don't want to escalate unless I have to. Monday brought a new development. The local elementary school that was supposed to benefit from the fun run issued a statement distancing themselves from the event. Liability. While we appreciate the HOA's desire to support our school, we were not consulted about the event planning or route selection. We do not condone the harassment of any community member, and we request that our school's name be removed from all event materials. Margaret must have been having an aneurysm. Tuesday, 4 days before the scheduled fun run, I received another visit. This time it was Stuart Chen, alone, looking tired. Can we talk? Off the record, neighbor to neighbor? I invited him in and offered him coffee. Margaret's lost her mind over this, he said, sitting at my kitchen table. She's talking about having people jump the fence if you won't open the gate. I tried to tell her that's trespassing and potentially breaking and entering, but she won't listen. If anyone jumps my fence, I'm calling the police. I know, that's why I'm here. He ran his hand through his hair. Look, I voted to approve the fun run route, and that was a mistake. We should have asked permission before we planned anything. But Margaret had these beautiful maps made, and she was so excited, and it seemed like such a small thing. Until someone gets sued. Yeah, he sighed. The board is meeting tonight. I'm going to propose that we cancel the event. You'll lose all the registration fees and vendor deposits. Less than we'd lose in a lawsuit if someone gets hurt. He looked at me. You were right about all of it. The liability, the insurance, the waivers. I talked to our insurance carrier, and they confirmed that our general liability policy wouldn't cover injuries on private property that we don't own or have a legal right to use. If we'd gone ahead with this and someone got hurt on your property, the HOA would be exposed to massive liability, and so would you. Thanks for understanding. I'm sorry it took this long. He stood up. For what it's worth, those violation fines were Margaret's idea, and they're going to be rescinded. I'm also going to propose that the board issue you a formal apology. I'd settle for being left alone, he smiled weakly. I'll see what I can do. That night, the HOA board held another emergency meeting. I didn't attend, but Derek did, and gave me a full report. It was spectacular, he said, calling me as soon as it was over. Stuart moved to cancel the fun run, and Margaret lost it, started screaming about how you'd ruined everything, how the community was falling apart, how no one respected her authority. Then, Linda pointed out that they'd already refunded most of the registration fees because people were dropping out after the news coverage. Apparently, having your charity fun run described as an HOA power trip isn't great for participation. Did they vote to cancel? 3-2. Margaret and one other voted to continue. Then Stuart moved to rescind your fines, and that passed 4-1, with Margaret voting against. Then the best part happened. What? Someone in the audience asked Margaret if she'd consulted an attorney before sending you that threatening letter. She said yes. Stuart asked who, because the HOA has a retained attorney and he knew it wasn't her. Turns out Margaret had her personal attorney write it and was planning to bill the HOA for it. That's embezzlement. That's what Linda said. She moved for a vote of no confidence. Margaret is no longer HOA president. I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. So it's over? The fun run is canceled, your fines are rescinded, and Margaret is off the board. I'd say it's over. Wednesday morning, I woke up to find my gate smashed. Someone had taken a sledgehammer or something similar to the lock and hinges, completely destroying the beautiful wrought ironwork. I called the police immediately. Officer Rodriguez showed up within 20 minutes and took photographs and a statement. Any idea who might have done this? The HOA president, well, former president now, threatened me last week. We've been in a dispute about property access. Margaret Pemberton? You know her? Officer Rodriguez smiled slightly. We've had calls about HOA disputes in this neighborhood before. She's got a reputation. Do you have security cameras? No, but I'm getting some installed today. He handed me a case number. File a report with your insurance. We'll investigate. But without witnesses or video, it's going to be hard to prove who did it. I called my insurance company, filed a claim, and then called a security company to get cameras installed immediately. Then I posted about the vandalism on the community social media group, along with photographs of the damage. The response was overwhelming. Dozens of neighbors expressed outrage and offered to help pay for repairs. 3 people admitted they had security cameras that might have caught something. And one person, a teenage kid named Brad who lived across the street, sent me a private message. I was skateboarding last night around 11 and saw Mrs. Pemberton's car parked near your house. Thought it was weird because she usually parks in her own driveway. She was there for like 10 minutes, then drove away fast. I forwarded the information to Officer Rodriguez. Thursday afternoon, 2 detectives showed up at Margaret's house. I didn't know this until later, but apparently one of the neighbors who offered camera footage actually caught Margaret on video, walking up to my gate with a sledgehammer at 10:47 p.m. Tuesday night. The police arrested her for criminal damage, which in Arizona is a felony if the damage exceeds $1,000. The gate repair estimate came in at $3,800. By Friday, the day the fun run was supposed to happen, the whole neighborhood knew what had happened. Margaret's mugshot was on the local news. The HOA issued a formal apology to me and offered to pay for the gate repairs out of the association's reserve fund. I accepted the apology but insisted on going through my insurance for the repairs, with the understanding that my deductible would be covered by restitution from Margaret's criminal case. Saturday morning, I stood in my backyard looking at the temporary fence the insurance company had installed while the gate was being custom fabricated. Derek walked over with 2 cups of coffee. "Hell of a week," he said, handing me one. "That's an understatement." Stuart asked me to join the board. They need to replace Margaret, and apparently I'm the only person crazy enough to volunteer after all this. "You going to do it?" "Maybe. Someone needs to keep them honest." He sipped his coffee. "You know what the really crazy thing is? If Margaret had just asked nicely from the beginning, explained what they wanted to do, and worked with you on the liability issues, you probably would have said yes." "Probably," I admitted. "I'm not actually against charity fund runs. I'm against being told what to do with my own property." The HOA board is implementing new policies. Any event that involves private property now requires written permission from the owner at least 60 days in advance, proof of insurance, and liability waivers. They're calling it the Eastwood Protocol. I laughed. Great. I'm going to be remembered as the guy who ruined fun runs. Better than being remembered as the lady who committed felony vandalism because someone wouldn't open a gate. Over the next few weeks, life in Willow Creek Estates slowly returned to normal. Margaret pleaded guilty to criminal damage and was sentenced to probation, community service, and ordered to pay restitution for my gate. She also resigned from the HOA board entirely and put her house up for sale. The new board, with Stuart as president and Derek as vice president, turned out to be remarkably reasonable. They rescinded about 40% of the more ridiculous HOA rules, including the one about gravel size and the one that had gotten the Hendersons fined for their desert willow. In October, 6 months after the whole mess started, the HOA organized a fall festival in the community park. This time, they did everything right. They got permits, insurance, and had every participant sign properly drafted liability waivers. They asked homeowners for permission before using any private property, and when one homeowner said no, they adjusted the route without complaint. I volunteered to help set up tables and chairs. While I was working, Stuart came over. "Hey, I wanted to run something by you. We're thinking about doing a charity fun run next spring, properly organized this time, with all the right paperwork and insurance. We were wondering if you'd be willing to serve on the planning committee." I looked at him to see if he was joking. He wasn't. "Why would you want me on the committee?" "Because you're the only person in this neighborhood who actually read the bylaws and understood the liability issues. We need someone who's going to ask the hard questions and make sure we don't end up in another disaster." "What about the route?" "Completely through public areas and HOA common property. No private land unless we get written permission months in advance." He held out his hand. "So what do you say?" I shook his hand. "I'll think about it. That's all I ask." That evening, I sat on my back patio, looking at the new gate that had been installed the previous month. It was even more beautiful than the original, with custom scrollwork and a lock that could probably survive a tank assault. Beyond it, the desert sunset painted the sky in shades of orange and purple, saguaros standing in silhouette against the fading light. My phone buzzed with a text from Derek. "Board meeting next Tuesday. We're voting on a proposal to install a community dog park. Figured you'd want to know." I typed back, "I'll be there." 6 months ago, I'd moved to Willow Creek Estates looking for a quiet place to live, a nice house with a yard, and neighbors who mostly kept to themselves. Instead, I'd ended up in a war with the HOA, made the local news, and become the face of property rights in homeowner association disputes. But I'd also learned something important. Community doesn't mean surrendering your rights or accepting unreasonable demands. It means working together, respecting boundaries, and finding solutions that work for everyone. It means speaking up when something isn't right, even when it's uncomfortable, even when people call you selfish or difficult. The new HOA board seemed to understand that. They'd learned the hard way that you can't force cooperation or demand compliance with things that aren't in the bylaws. You can't retaliate against homeowners for asserting their legal rights. And you definitely can't smash someone's gate with a sledgehammer when you don't get your way. I looked at the gate again, solid and secure, protecting my property and my peace of mind. Sometimes the right decision isn't the easy one. Sometimes standing up for yourself means becoming temporary enemy number one in your own neighborhood. But in the end, it's worth it. My phone buzzed again. This time, it was Jennifer Torres, the reporter from the Arizona Republic. Hey Zach, working on a follow-up piece about HOA reform in Arizona. The Eastwood Protocol is being adopted by associations across the Phoenix metro area. Interested in an interview? I smiled and typed back, "Sure, but only if you promise not to use the phrase gate. No promises." The next morning, I was in my front yard checking the mail when a moving truck pulled up to Margaret's house. I watched as movers started loading furniture and boxes. Part of me felt bad for her. She'd lost her position, her reputation, and now her home, all because she couldn't accept the word no. But then I remembered the threatening visits, the retaliatory fines, the smashed gate, and the feeling of being bullied in my own neighborhood. Actions have consequences. Margaret had chosen her path, and now she was living with the results. A woman I didn't recognize walked over from across the street. She was probably in her 30s, with dark hair pulled back in a ponytail. "You're Zachary Eastwood, right? I'm Felicity Morrison. My husband and I are moving into the Whitmore house next week." Linda Whitmore had decided to retire and move to Tucson to be closer to her grandchildren. Apparently, serving on the HOA board during the fun run debacle had cured her of any desire to deal with community politics. "Welcome to the neighborhood," I said, shaking her hand. "I have to admit, I read about everything that happened here before we made our offer. Almost scared us off." "But you bought anyway?" She smiled. "My husband's a lawyer. He read through the HOA bylaws and was impressed by how much they'd been improved recently. Plus, he said any community where a homeowner successfully fought back against HOA overreach and won was probably a pretty good place to live. Tell your husband he might get recruited for the board. He's counting on it." Over the next few weeks, I met more new neighbors. The Hendersons from 2 streets over invited me to a barbecue. The teenage kid Brad, who'd helped with the investigation, asked if I'd write him a recommendation letter for college, citing his civic responsibility in reporting a crime. I said yes. Derek convinced me to join the planning committee for the spring fun run, and I found myself in meetings with Stuart, Linda's replacement, and 3 other homeowners who actually seemed to care about doing things right. "Okay," I said at our first meeting, pulling out a checklist I'd created. "First item, route planning. We need to survey the entire route for potential hazards, uneven pavement, low-hanging branches, anything that could cause injuries." A woman named Patricia nodded, taking notes. "I can coordinate that. I'll get volunteers to walk the route and document everything." Second, insurance. We need event liability coverage with at least $2 million in coverage, naming the HOA and any property owners whose land we use as additionally insured parties. "Already got quotes from 3 companies," Stuart said. "Should have it locked in by next week." Third, waivers. I've got the template my attorney prepared. Every participant over 18 signs for themselves. Anyone under 18 needs a parent or guardian signature. "What about day of registration?" someone asked. "No one runs without a signed waiver. Period. We'll have a table at registration with spare forms and someone to witness signatures." Patricia looked up from her notes. 6 months ago, this would have seemed like overkill. Now it just seems like common sense." "That's because it is common sense," I said. "We're not doing this to be difficult. We're doing it to protect everyone involved, the runners, the HOA, and the homeowners." The planning took 3 months. We scouted routes, got insurance, prepared waivers, recruited volunteers, and coordinated with local police for traffic control. We reached out to the elementary school that Margaret had tried to involve without permission, and this time, we did it right. We met with the principal, explained our plans, and asked if they wanted to participate. They said yes, and helped us organize a fundraising campaign that was transparent, well-managed, and actually beneficial to the school. When registration opened in March, we had 150 sign-ups in the first week. The route went through the community park, along public streets with proper permits, and through a section of the desert trail system that was owned by the city. Not 1 inch of private property unless we had explicit written permission. One homeowner, an older man named Felix Harper who lived near the park, actually volunteered to let runners cut through his corner lot because it would make the route safer by avoiding a busy intersection. We got his permission in writing, added him to the insurance policy, and had every participant sign an additional waiver specific to his property. The day of the spring fun run was perfect. Clear blue Arizona sky, temperature in the low 70s, just enough breeze to keep everyone comfortable. I was stationed at the registration table, checking waivers and handing out race bibs. Derek jogged over, wearing shorts and a race shirt. "You're not running?" "Someone has to make sure the paperwork is in order." "Classic Zach." He grabbed his race bib. "Thanks for doing this, by the way. I know it's not how you plan to spend your Saturday." "Actually, it's kind of nice. Community events are fine when they're done right." Stewart gave a speech at the starting line, thanking everyone for participating and acknowledging the school representatives who were there to accept the fundraising proceeds. He also took a moment to thank everyone who helped us learn to do this the right way, looking directly at me when he said it. The race went off without a hitch. A few minor scrapes and one person who needed water for dehydration, but nothing serious. The volunteers were positioned at every turn, the police managed traffic perfectly, and every single participant had signed a proper waiver. When it was over and we were cleaning up, Felix Harper came over to me. "Wanted to thank you, son, for standing up to Margaret when she was out of control. I've lived in this neighborhood for 15 years, and the last 5, ever since she became president, were the worst. She turned the HOA into her personal fiefdom." "I just didn't want people running through my yard," he laughed. "You did more than that. You reminded everyone that the HOA works for us, not the other way around. Property rights matter, personal boundaries matter, and no one, not even the HOA president, gets to steamroll over people just because they have a clipboard and a title." After everyone left, I walked the route one last time, picking up stray water cups and making sure everything was clean. The sun was setting, painting the desert in those familiar shades of orange and purple. My phone rang. It was my attorney. "Just wanted to let you know, Margaret's restitution check cleared. Your insurance company has been fully repaid for the gate, including your deductible." "Good to know. Also, I got a call from a homeowner in Scottsdale who's having issues with his HOA, demanding access to his backyard for a neighborhood party. I gave him your number. Hope that's okay." "Sure, happy to help. You're becoming the go-to guy for HOA property rights disputes. There are worse reputations to have. Over the next year, I consulted with 6 different homeowners across the Phoenix area who were dealing with similar issues. Some were as simple as sending a strongly worded letter explaining Arizona property law. Others required attorneys and formal legal action. But in every case, the homeowner won, because the law was clear. Your property is your property, and no HOA can force you to surrender your rights without your consent. The Willow Creek Estates HOA continued to improve. Derek and Stewart implemented new policies requiring transparency, financial accountability, and respect for homeowner rights. Fines could only be issued for legitimate violations that were applied equally to everyone. Any rule change required a vote of the full membership, not just the board. Attendance at HOA meetings went from a handful of people to sometimes 30 or 40 homeowners, actually engaged and interested in their community. It turned out that when you treated people with respect and didn't try to control every aspect of their lives, they were willing to participate and contribute. The Fall Festival became an annual tradition. The Spring Fun Run raised over $15,000 for the elementary school. The community dog park that Derek had texted me about got built and became a neighborhood gathering spot, and my gate remained locked unless I specifically chose to open it, which I did sometimes, usually for my neighbors who asked politely if they could show visiting friends the trail system. Because that's what good neighbors do. They ask, they respect boundaries, and they work together. 2 years after the original incident, I was sitting on my back patio when Derek came through the side gate, carrying a 6-pack of beer. Board meeting got canceled. Stewart's wife went into labor. Their 3rd kid, right? Yeah, he's officially stepping down as president next month. Says 3 kids and a full-time job doesn't leave time for HOA drama. Can't blame him. I accepted a beer. Who's running to replace him? Felicity Morrison. Remember the lawyer's wife who moved in after everything went down? Turns out she's a paralegal with experience in community association law. She'll be great. What about you? I'm staying on as vice president. Someone has to maintain institutional memory. He settled into a chair. You know what's funny? That whole nightmare with Margaret and the fun run was probably the best thing that ever happened to this HOA. How do you figure? It forced everyone to wake up and pay attention. Before that, people just let the board do whatever they wanted because it was easier than getting involved. Now we've got engaged homeowners, reasonable policies, and actual community instead of just a neighborhood with an HOA. And all it took was a smashed gate and a felony arrest. Some lessons are expensive. He raised his beer. To expensive lessons and locked gates. I clinked my bottle against his. To property rights and common sense. As the sun set over the desert, I thought about everything that had happened. The confrontations, the stress, the media attention, the vandalism. It had been exhausting and frustrating and sometimes scary. But it had also been necessary. Sometimes you have to stand up for yourself, even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard, because if you don't, who will? The gate stood behind me, solid and secure, a reminder that boundaries matter, that rights matter, that no one, not an HOA president or a board or a community organization, gets to decide what happens on your property without your permission. My phone buzzed with a message from Felicity Morrison. Zach, would you be willing to serve on the board? We need someone with your expertise for the Rules and Compliance Committee. I looked at Derek, who was watching me with an amused expression. She asked you to join the board, didn't she? How did you know? Because you have that look. How did I go from wanting to be left alone to being involved in HOA politics look? I typed back, let me think about it. You're going to say yes, Derek predicted. Probably, I admitted. Someone has to make sure they don't plan any more fun runs through people's backyards. He laughed, and we sat there in the gathering darkness, two guys who'd accidentally become advocates for homeowner rights in a neighborhood that had learned the hard way about the importance of boundaries, respect, and following the law. The gate remained locked, a symbol of a battle fought and won. But more than that, it was a reminder that communities work best when everyone's rights are respected, when boundaries are honored, and when people work together instead of trying to force compliance through threats and intimidation. In the distance, I could hear kids playing in the community park, their laughter carrying on the evening breeze. The HOA, that had once been a source of stress and conflict, had transformed into something better, something that actually served the community instead of ruling over it. And it all started because I refused to open a gate. Sometimes the smallest stands make the biggest difference. Sometimes saying no is the most important word you can say. And sometimes protecting your property rights isn't just about you, it's about setting a precedent, establishing boundaries, and reminding everyone that power has limits. I finished my beer and looked at my phone, at Felicity's message still waiting for a response. Then I typed, "Okay, I'm in, but I'm not planning any fun runs." Her response came back immediately. "Deal. We need you for the boring stuff like bylaw compliance and violation procedures anyway." Derek peered over my shoulder. "Welcome to the dark side. If you can't beat them, join them and make sure they don't do anything stupid." Exactly. The stars were coming out now, brilliant against the darkening sky. In 2 years, I'd gone from a guy who just wanted a quiet house with a nice yard to someone who'd fought the HOA, won, and then joined forces with them to build something better. Life's funny that way. You think you know what you want: peace, quiet, privacy, and those things are important. But sometimes you end up finding something you didn't know you needed. A community that actually functions, neighbors who respect each other, and the satisfaction of knowing you made a difference. The gate would stay locked unless I chose to open it. That was the point. Choice, consent. Respect for property rights and personal boundaries. But now, when I looked at that gate, I didn't just see a barrier. I saw a turning point, the moment when one neighborhood learned that HOAs are supposed to serve their communities, not rule them. When homeowners learned that they have rights and the power to enforce them. When everyone discovered that standing up for yourself, even when it's difficult, is sometimes the only way to create real change. And honestly, that was worth more than any charity fun run could ever be. Derek stood up, collecting the empty bottles. "Board meeting next week, 7 o'clock. Don't be late." "Yes, sir, Mr. Vice President." "I'm serious. Felicity wants to propose new architectural guidelines, and we need your voice of reason to keep things sane." After he left, I sat alone in my backyard, the desert night settling around me like a comfortable blanket. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled. Closer by, I could hear the hum of air conditioners and the faint sound of someone's television through an open window. This was home. Not just the house, but the neighborhood, the community, all of it. Imperfect, sometimes frustrating, but ultimately worth fighting for. I thought about Margaret sometimes, wondered where she'd ended up, whether she'd learned anything from the experience. Probably not. Some people never learn that you can't control everything and everyone around you. That respect is earned, not demanded. That power without accountability leads to disaster. But the rest of us had learned. We'd learned about liability insurance and property rights. We'd learned about proper procedures and democratic processes. We'd learned that community doesn't mean giving up your individuality or your rights. It means finding ways to coexist while respecting everyone's boundaries. And we'd learned it all because of a locked gate and a woman who couldn't accept the word no. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through my photos until I found the one I'd taken right after the gate was installed, before any of this started. Beautiful wrought iron, decorative scrollwork, a simple lock. Then I scrolled to the photos from after Margaret smashed it. Twisted metal, broken hinges, destruction. And finally, I looked at the newest photos, the replacement gate. Stronger, more secure, more beautiful than the original. Sometimes things have to break before they can be rebuilt better than before. Sometimes you have to go through hell to get to something worth having. I deleted the photos of the destroyed gate. No point holding on to the damage when the story had a good ending. Tomorrow, I'd probably get another call from someone dealing with HOA overreach. I'd offer advice, share my attorney's contact information, maybe review their bylaws to help them understand their rights. It had become a weird hobby, helping homeowners stand up to unreasonable HOAs. But tonight, I was just going to sit in my backyard, behind my locked gate, in my home, in my community, and enjoy the peace that comes from knowing you stood up for what was right, even when it was hard. The gate was locked, but the door to possibility, to community, to positive change, that was wide open, and that made all the difference.